A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Minister for Local Government, Housing, Environment, Infrastructure and Transport, Mr. Honorable Praveen Bala, the Indian High Commissioner to Fiji, Mr. Viva Sapkal, the Commissioner of Western, Momo Tuivunda, the CEO of Lautoka City Council, the Chairman of the Fiji Girmit Council, the organizing chairman of the committee that led to the culmination of today's celebration, Mr. Azmat Khan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for that very long and embarrassing introduction. But it gives me much pleasure to be here this morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be here with all of you today to commemorate an event that marked the end of one of the darkest periods, yet one of the most significant periods in Fijian history. And that is the transportation of indentured laborers from British India over 100 years ago, the last group of indentured laborers that were brought from British India 100 years ago. The legacy of those indentured laborers, ladies and gentlemen, the Girmitiers, as explained by the High Commissioner, as to why they were called Girmitiers, they could not say the word agreement. So these indentured laborers said Girmit, and so they became known as Girmitiers. As you know that the world had slavery, America had slavery, slaves were sent from Africa and various other parts of the world to South America, to West Indies, to South America, to Mauritius. Whilst the Americans continued with slavery, the British decided to end slavery only informally. So they came up with a system, rather than calling it slavery, they called it the indenture labor system, which essentially meant a kind of refined form of slavery. This, of course, the legacy of the indentured laborers, and the legacy of that, of course, can still be seen throughout Fiji till this day. It is not only lives of the descendants, but the determined and tenacious spirit of the Girmitiers that serves as a source of inspiration for all Fijians today. That legacy, of course, ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding the trials and tribulations, has made Fiji a proud nation that it is today. Because despite the immense adversity faced by the Girmitiers, they forged new lives for themselves in Fiji and ultimately overcame their struggle. Between 1879, the first ship, Leonidas, which most people know about, and in 1916, 42 ships made a total of 87 voyages carrying British Indian indentured laborers to Fiji. Oftentimes, they were lured away from their homes with false promises. These Girmitiers endured the grueling journey from India. They suffered demeaning treatment from their overseers, and they slaved away under violent, repressive work conditions. Due to the high cost of returning to British India, many of them had no choice but to stay in Fiji. In the face of much misery, while it would be easy to abandon hope and give in to despair, instead they persevered. The Girmitiers' contribution to this nation began the very day they set foot in Fiji, building roads, clearing land, and harvesting sugarcane. The success of Fiji's colonial economy depended heavily on their sweat, their effort, and their talent. Here in Lautoka, it is wonderful to see so many Fijians here to commemorate this important event. As we all know, the history of the Girmitiers is also the history of Lautoka. A great many Girmitiers came to Lautoka to work here or in the surrounding areas, clearing land or working the sugarcane fields. And I know that a number of the descendants are here with us today, in particular sitting in the first and the second rows. More than anything else, this is your day, a day in which you remember your ancestors with pride and pay tribute to the sacrifices they made for our entire nation. As you know, Lautoka was in the main centers of the sugar industry, and its development mirrored the health of the industry. When Lautoka grew big enough in 1929 to be declared a town, it was in large part because of the efforts of the Girmiti in the years before to develop its infrastructure, such as the roads, the wharf, and the rail network. And of course, many of the descendants can also be accredited with the expansion of Lautoka in the subsequent decades to the point where it would be declared a city in 1977. Many other Girmitias passed through the port of Lautoka on their way to other parts of the west, such as Nanrama, Ba, Tavua, and Rekireki. So they're brought here, then they're sent off to other parts of the Western Division. And they've also become an important part of the history of the entire Western region in Fiji. In villages, towns, and cities all across Fiji, we can still see the stories of the Girmitias around us. Those stories, ladies and gentlemen, are part of the story of Fiji. And unfortunately, this part of the story or the narrative of Fiji has been very much left out. And we intend to, of course, change that. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, these celebrations are being held nationwide in the recognition of the nationwide impact that the Girmitias have had on our country. The accounts recorded by Girmitias in Fiji tell us much about their suffering, but words alone cannot fully capture the emotion and the pain they experienced. So much of what makes our lives fulfilling and enjoyable is found in our relationships, our families, our friends, and our communities. To lose all of that, to be forced to live and work in isolation would cause any one of us untold suffering. I'm going to take a departure from my speech now, ladies and gentlemen. In the 1970s, an academic from USP, many of you knew him also, his name was Dr. Ahmad Ali. Ahmad Ali was one of the first academics in Fiji who actually went and interviewed Girmitias themselves. As you know, all Girmitias who came to Fiji are now dead. But he managed to gather many of these Girmitias and actually question them and ask of their record of what they went through. Unfortunately, in the 1970s, many things weren't visually recorded. Today, of course, if we have the mobile phone, we could have recorded them or what they said. But what he did was, he recorded what they told him and he then transcribed that. So we have with us today some speakers from Fiji, sorry, I should say from Suva, who actually are going to read to you the actual experiences of those Girmitias who Dr. Ahmad Ali interviewed. And the first story is of a gentleman called Lakpat. And we have the first speaker who will actually narrate to you what Lakpat said to Dr. Ahmad Ali. Please pay attention. Teachers, please control your students. It is important that our students also get to know what these people went through. Because it is only through a recognition and understanding of what they went through will we actually appreciate the history of Fiji. So please pay attention and we'll hear from Mary the experience of Lakpat. Thank you.
The story of Abdulaziz. I left India because I was told I would receive a shilling a day for work in Fiji. I went to Naitasiri to serve my Girmit. For a month, I spent my time crying. When I got to Naitasiri, I thought that I would never see my parents again. But after shedding tears for a month, I decided I must work despite my despair. On our sugar estate, some who did not learn about cane cultivation were given a thorough beating. Our state was so bad enough, but there were others far worse, where people were disgraced completely. I did not like to work at all, but I told myself that if I did not work, I would die of starvation. There were only two alternatives. Work or a threshing.
story of Mahadev. I was 16 when I came to Fiji. I was unmarried and an orphan. My parents had died in an epidemic. I came to Fiji because I was lured by a man who asked me if I was looking for work. There were 200 migrants on my trip. Once we reached Fiji, I was sent to Dhuvu via Lautoka. There, I was set the task of cutting grass. If we did not finish our task, our money was not paid because of incomplete work. There was a South Indian with us. He used to do a lot of singing and dancing, but he was not able to work much, and he used to get a terrible beating from the overseer. So one day, he took off into the bush and hung himself. We used to think of home, but what was the purpose of it? Home was so far away, and even if we wanted to go, we could not because we had no money. I saved no money during my indenture. Besides, in any case, I had nobody in India. So for me, there was no person or place to return to. Despite such treatment, I had no choice but continue to live on and survive.
The story of Mahadev. There was no conflict with Fijians in those days. If you gave them something, they reciprocated. During indentured days, some Indians would run away and go to a Fijian village. They were given shelter there, as well as provided with food. If you took Yangwana into a village, then all of them there would share what they had with you. In the very early days, they used to smell the roti first and then throw it away. It was later then they learned to eat it.
Intermittent incidences of violence, but it was filled with violence. So there's threats of violence, people who were whipped. There's also cases, a lot of it has been documented, a lot of it has not been documented, of sexual exploitation, of abuse, and of course, the overindulgence of the overseers. Many of them, of course, as you would have heard, were from Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, as I have said, that this transportation of people from their homes into a foreign land, ripped away from their families and lives that they knew, the Girmitians often drew strength from the hope that things would get better. Maybe not for them, but for the future generations. At first, they had no access to education, but still they knew that education, or that knowledge, was the best path to a better life. This is why you see subsequently throughout Fiji, in many of the sugarcane farming areas, small schools came up, and they saw that education is a way out of poverty, as a way of getting some form of equality. That commitment to education, of course, ladies and gentlemen, has not faltered since those early days. Girmitians and their descendants have had a major role in helping create a more knowledge-based society in Fiji. Every day their work, their values and their sacrifices helped build the new modern Fiji and bring advancement to the lives of every Fijian, so that we all prepare for whatever challenges and opportunities the future holds for us. We must all never forget that while the practice of the indenture ended many years ago, that feeling of alienation felt by many Fijians of Girmitian descent persisted for decades. It took 97 years from the arrival of that last ship for the descendants of Girmitians to be called Fijians, to truly become a part of our nation and participate fully in national life. When the Bainimarama government, and now the Fiji First government, came into power in in 2007, in 2013, through the Constitution, declared all of us Fijians equal and united as one nation and one people. It was a realization of the hopes and dreams of hundreds of thousands of direct descendants of the Girmitians. While many of the ancestors had never heard of Fiji prior to their arrival in that moment, this nation now truly has become your home, and it will remain so for all the time. The journey has been long, and perhaps too long, and not without difficulty. But here we are, all united than ever before, and all committed to taking Fiji into the future. And it is therefore very critical for all of us to understand our history, the different histories, whether it's the history of the Girmitians, whether it's the history of the people in Dolo, people in Ra, what happened in the outer islands, what happened in Vanuatu, the alienation of the land. All of that needs to be discussed in our national narrative, and with that honesty that all history deems and is necessary. It is not the duty of any one community to remember the sacrifices and the suffering that led to this commemoration. We must all remember. It is a responsibility of all of us as Fijians to remember all of these issues. We must all reflect on them, and we must all uphold the legacy of the Girmitians. In the same way they strove to build better lives for the descendants, we must strive to lead a nation that is better than what we inherited. I would like to echo the announcement of His Excellency the President in his statement at the commemoration held in Suva earlier this week, in fact yesterday, that in 2020, for the 100-year anniversary of the end of the Indentured System, we will be holding a special commemoration throughout Fiji to mark the end of the indenture era. And coincidentally, ladies and gentlemen, that is the same time when Fiji will become 50 years old from independence. My fellow Fijians, it is an emotional day for all of us as we remember past trauma and look back on our history, but it's also a day of celebration of how far we've come. Many Fijians yesterday, we were at Albert Park, said when we read those stories, they said they never knew that these people experienced these types of trauma, these types of events. They did not know how they were disseminated throughout Fiji. So that in itself is a positive thing, to be able to know what some of your fellow Fijians or their descendants went through. It helps us to appreciate each other. So let us all give thanks for the Girmitians and the descendants, and let us all try and live up to the example of perseverance and determination they displayed despite the trying circumstances.
Requesting the Huda group to begin the entertainment, please.
जहाज आइसरा सतलज